If someone suddenly ignores you after showing interest, it's not random. You didn't lose them, you revealed something. And once you understand what that is, you'll start seeing it everywhere. People don't just wake up one day and decide to lose interest. That's not how attraction works. Interest doesn't disappear instantly. It fades slowly and quietly, almost invisibly. And most people miss the exact moment when it starts happening, because they are too focused on what they feel instead of what they are showing. The truth is simple but uncomfortable. When someone pulls away from you, it's usually because something shifted in how they perceive you. Not because you were not enough, but because you became too predictable. Attraction is not built on certainty. It is built on tension, on curiosity, on the unknown. And the moment you remove that, you remove the reason to stay engaged. Think about how it started. In the beginning, you were not trying so hard. You were relaxed. You were present. You were not chasing an outcome. And that is exactly what made you interesting. There was space in your behavior. There was uncertainty. There was something for the other person to figure out. You were not giving everything away at once. You were simply being. And that created a natural pull. But then something changed. You started thinking more, analyzing more, investing more. You started replying faster, showing more availability, giving more reassurance. You started trying to maintain the connection instead of letting it develop naturally. And without realizing it, you removed the very thing that created the attraction in the first place. Most people believe that showing more interest will create more interest in return. But attraction does not respond to effort in a linear way. It responds to perception. And perception is shaped by contrast, by space, by emotional movement. When everything becomes constant, predictable, and certain, there is nothing left to interpret, nothing left to explore, nothing left to anticipate. And when there is nothing to anticipate, the emotional engagement starts to fade. Not because the person decided to lose interest, but because the interaction stopped creating emotional stimulation. When you become too available too quickly, you remove the sense of progression. You remove the feeling of earning access to you. And without that sense of progression, there is no psychological investment. People value what they feel they are moving toward, what they feel they are discovering step by step. But when everything is given up front, the experience becomes flat. There is no build-up, no tension, no curiosity, just certainty. And certainty feels stable, but it rarely feels exciting. This is why people sometimes pull away, even when nothing negative happened, because the dynamic lost its edge. It became too clear too soon. And clarity without tension often leads to disinterest. Not because you are not valuable, but because the interaction stopped activating emotion. Attraction is emotional before it is logical, and emotions need variation to stay active. They need moments of uncertainty, moments of anticipation, moments where the outcome is not fully known. And here is where most people make the situation worse. When they feel someone pulling away, they try to fix it immediately. They increase effort. They reach out more. They try to re-engage. They try to remind the other person of what they had. But from the other person's perspective, this does not restore attraction. It confirms the shift. It confirms that the dynamic has changed and that you are now the one seeking validation. And once that perception is established, it becomes very difficult to reverse, because attraction is not based on what you say. It is based on what the other person feels in response to you. The more you try to control the outcome, the less natural the interaction becomes. And the less natural it feels, the less emotionally engaging it becomes. People are drawn to interactions that feel effortless, not forced, not managed, not controlled. When something feels forced, it creates subtle resistance, and that resistance slowly replaces the initial interest that was there before. This is why silence can be more powerful than effort, not as a tactic, but as a restoration of balance. When you stop reacting immediately and stop trying to fill every gap, you allow space to exist again, and that space changes how the other person experiences you. It interrupts the pattern that they have already adapted to. It breaks the expectation of constant access. It introduces uncertainty again, and uncertainty creates attention. It creates thought. It creates emotional movement, It makes the interaction feel alive again instead of fixed and predictable. Because when everything is immediate and consistent, there is no reason to think, no reason to wonder, no reason to question anything. The experience becomes passive. But the moment there is space, the mind becomes active again. The other person starts replaying moments. They start asking themselves questions. They start filling in the gaps. And that internal process is what creates emotional engagement. Not what you say, but what they start thinking on their own. Most people are uncomfortable with silence because they associate it with loss. They feel that if they do not act immediately, they will lose the connection. They feel pressure to respond, to maintain, to keep the interaction alive at all times. But in many cases, acting immediately is what accelerates the loss, because it removes the possibility for the other person to feel the absence. And without absence, there is nothing to think about, nothing to miss, nothing to wonder about, nothing to emotionally process. Silence is not empty, it is full of interpretation, and that interpretation is what creates meaning. When you constantly fill every moment, you remove the need for interpretation. You remove the space where feelings develop on their own. And when feelings are not self-generated, they do not last. They become dependent on constant input. And anything that depends on constant input becomes exhausting over time. Attraction is not sustained by constant presence. It is sustained by rhythm, presence and absence, engagement and space, expression and restraint. When that rhythm exists, the interaction feels natural, it feels dynamic, it feels alive. But when that rhythm disappears and everything becomes constant, the experience loses depth. It becomes flat, it becomes predictable. And predictable interactions rarely hold attention for long, because the mind already knows what to expect. The human mind is drawn to variation. It pays attention to what changes. It responds to what is not fully defined. And when everything is fully defined too early, there is nothing left to explore, no reason to stay mentally engaged. That is why unpredictability, when it is natural, creates more interest than consistency that feels forced. Not because unpredictability is better, but because it keeps the experience open. So when someone ignores you after showing interest, do not interpret it as a random change. Do not assume it means you are not enough. Do not rush to fix it. Look at the dynamic. Look at what changed in the interaction. Look at how your behavior shifted. Look at what became too certain too quickly. Not to blame yourself, but to understand the pattern. Because once you understand the pattern, you stop reacting emotionally and start seeing clearly. And clarity changes everything. It changes how you respond. It changes how you communicate. It changes how you show up in future interactions. Instead of trying to secure interest, you allow it to develop. Instead of trying to maintain connection, you let it breathe. Instead of reacting to every shift, you observe it. And that shift in your behavior creates a completely different experience for the other person. Because now, you are no longer trying to control the interaction. You are allowing it to unfold. And when something unfolds naturally, it feels different. It feels less pressured, less predictable, more real. And people respond to that without always understanding why. They just feel it. People are not drawn to control. They are drawn to feeling something. And feeling something requires space, uncertainty, and emotional movement. It requires moments where the outcome is not guaranteed. Moments where they have to think, to feel, to interpret. When you understand that, you stop overcompensating. You stop overgiving. You stop trying to force outcomes. And instead, you create conditions where attraction can exist naturally without being pushed. And that is the difference between someone who constantly feels ignored and someone people stay curious about. Not because they try harder, but because they understand the dynamic behind the interaction. And once you understand the dynamic, you stop chasing reactions and start creating presence. And presence, when it is balanced with space, is what keeps attention alive over time. Most people will never notice when this happens.